All right, welcome back. This is the sixth, I think, installment of our review session where we're working on this AP Computer Science A prep guide. We're on chapter 8 today. I'm going to break this up into 3 videos. So this is the 6A, part A. The 3 things are covered in the same chapter. It talks about arrays, searching, and sorting. And I think these deserve separate treatment. Okay? Is this aimed here? Can we see? All right. Let's talk about arrays first. An array is just a chunk of memory. You know, we talked about classes and objects last time where you have chunks of memory that are created. An array is even dumber. It's just a chunk of memory divided into a little section of boxes. Okay, now each of these boxes has some data type. We talked about data types before: int, double, boolean, string. It could even be a class, right? Like shape, right? It's just some type, a list of those things. And they're always consecutive, so they're all together. Now, the thing about an array is you have to know how many you have that you're going to need. You can't change it later. So when you declare an array, let's see, there's several ways to do that. I'm going to refer to the book to make sure I do it the way they want it. Okay, so I can say something like boolean, start with the data type, like any variable declaration. The difference is these square brackets like this. When we're just declaring a regular variable, we don't need those. For this, we have an array. And then the name. Call this truths. Okay? And then you could say new okay? So, in this case, I've chosen booleans. So I've got a boolean array called truths. Then I have used this keyword new, boolean, and then in the square brackets 3. I have to do that at the beginning. This is an initializer. I think that's what it's called, yes. This is the initializer. And I've said there's going to be 3, so 1, 2, 3. And in this example, it's like that. Okay? That's one way you can create an array. The second way is like this. Okay? Now in this case, we don't just create the boxes. We actually have the initializer here that provides the initial values. False, true, true. Okay, so there's 2 different ways. If you already know the values you want, go ahead and put them there. If you just know that I need so many, but you don't know how, what the values are, use the top way. Each of these data types has defaults. So for example, if this was ints, and you created 3, this would be 0, 0, 0. If you did, you know. If you use this way, of course, you'd say int something, 5, 6, 7 or something, whatever your values were. But if you use this top method, it's always going to fill the array with whatever the default is. I think for Boolean, it fills it with false, if I'm not mistaken. For something like an object like shape, I think it's just null, nothing. So depends. So this one's a little sketchier. If you know the values, use this one. Okay. All right, so a very common thing we do a lot with arrays is traverse the array. Okay, traverse. That's basically scanning through the array for some reason. So let's switch this up. Let's use ints. Okay, so I'm going to say int array nums is equal to 4, 5, 6. Those are my nums. Okay? Now, to traverse it, we use a loop. So, for example, this is one from the book. There's different ways you could do it. You could use a while loop, you could use a for loop. Your book shows a for loop. So we could say for int I. By the way, we often use I for loops because I is short for index. 0, I is less than 3, I plus plus. If you remember that from when we talked about iteration in for loops, we've got the initializer, the condition, and the incrementer, or the thing that changes the index. Okay. Actually, they just did something simple in your book, so we'll do that too. We'll say nums times equal 2. So, what this does, it's going to loop through from 0 to 3. So 0, 1, 2. So there's a 4 here, 5 here, 6 here. And this is just going to multiply each one by, oh, I'm sorry, that's not quite right. Not thinking. Nums I, there we go. It's going to multiply each one by 2. So this thing that I forgot here, this the square bracket with the I, that's how you select which one you want to operate on. If you just talk about nums, you're talking about the whole array. But usually you want one particular box here. So we're going to go through each one from 0, 1, 2, look in the box and multiply it by 2 in this case. Okay? So hopefully that's pretty simple. Pretty simple? Pretty simple. Okay, now here's a problem. It's a very common problem. By the, this can happen to you very, very easily. What if I did this? What do you think is going to happen? If you do that and you try to run it, you're going to be introduced to a new Java concept. You're going to be introduced to something called the array index out of bounds exception. That's a mouthful. In Java, when the thing just blows up, throws its hands up, and says, I don't know what to do, it's called an exception. So in this case, you specified from I to go to 0 to up to 4, not including 4, so it's going to go 0, 1, 2, 3. All right, 0, this is 0, 1, 2. There is no 3. You're off the end of the array, so it's out of bounds. There is no recovery from that, because you've asked the computer to do something wrong, so it blows up with this error. So you got to be really careful about setting these bounds on your loop. But is there a smarter way? And it turns out there is. It's easier. For arrays and array lists too, but we'll talk about that in a future video. But for arrays, you can do something like this. See if I can get this right. Actually, no, before we get there, let's go back to the other way. Our int I is equal to 0, I is less than nums length I plus plus. Now we're saying no. Same thing as before, except instead of just saying 3 or 4 or something like that, I put nums.length in there. That's going to be less than that. So its length is 3. You always come, it's up to, but not including the last one. So that's 0, 1, 2. 0, 1, 2. You're not going to run off the end. So if you use this length technique here, you won't crash your arrays. So a little more typing, but a lot more safety. Good idea to do that. I got a little note here in the book that says the AP exam will require you to create, traverse, and modify arrays in the free response. So if you're going through your book, it's always good to look at these little rectangles here because it's going to tell you what's on the test. Okay. so now if you don't care about the I, here we've been looking at the I. Let's say you want to do something like, you just want to use the values. You don't care about the index itself. So let's say you want to add up these numbers. I could do something like int total equals 0. And I could say 1 nums. Okay, I think that's about right. Yeah, that's right. So what this is going to do is automatically go through each of the elements of num. There's no I, there's no index. Before we were dealing with the index is down here, right? Index is 0, 1, 2, and so on. In this case, we don't care about that, that's invisible. It's just going to take each one in turn. So in this case, every time we go through the loop, 1 is going to, do I have to say an int? I think I might. Yes, I do, sorry. I have to say an int here, okay. Every time we go through the loop, 1 will be 4, 5, and 6. So it's just dealing with the values. It doesn't care about the index. Does that make sense? Okay, so this is a little cleaner. Depends on your use. Sometimes you care about the index, right? But sometimes you're just rolling through and doing some simple computations on this stuff. You really don't care. You just want the values. In this case, this method here is cleaner, simpler, and even less prone to error. So I recommend that. All right, I think one other thing I'll mention here because it talks in the book, and then this will be the end of this section on arrays. Let's go through a different example. If you'll remember from the last video, the long one, y'all watched that, right? The whole thing. We talked about the shape class, right? And we talked about how you can say, actually, let's just use it. We'll say shape picture is equal to new shape 3. Okay, so we're going to create an array of 3 shapes. Right now, shape is not a primitive data type, right? These will be objects that we create. Right, so now here we have to populate this. We'll come down here and let's say we'll say picture 1 is equal to new shape. Okay, we'll just use the simple constructor from our last video. Does that make sense? Okay, now you notice I didn't use 0, I used 1. So if we draw a picture, here's our array, our index 0, 1, 2. So I've just set this one to some shape, right? Now it initializes these initially as for an object. Remember I said they have defaults if you don't set it to something? It sets this to be null until you set it to be something else. So I set the first one to be a new shape. So it now has a rational value. What happens if I try to do something with this one? So if I say something like, well, let's try to use the one that's good first. Picture 1 dot, what was one of the methods we talked about last time? Draw or move? It would move, right? Move, 13. Okay, I think move was one of the methods that we defined on shape last time. So, okay, so that's valid. I go to the index 1, and it's a shape there, and I can go dot move on that shape, no problem. Now what happens though if I did this? Now I'm going to use picture 0. Uh-oh, that's a null. If I try to use a null by going dot move, there is no null dot anything. In fact, when you try to do that, you get null pointer exception. Again, another exception, because you've tried to access something on a nothing. And Java goes, I don't know what that means. I give up, I quit. Null pointer exception. These are so common, they actually have an abbreviation, NPE. You hear about an NPE, that's what they're talking about, null pointer exception. Incredibly common. A lot of methods in some, even some Java classes, return a null if it's not happy. Imagine that. So you get this return, if you're not careful and check it, you start to use this thing saying, oh sure, I got a valid response. Boom, your whole program blows up. Lovely. So that's what that is. But that's how you can get one here, is if you're using one of these array elements that hasn't been set to something, hasn't been initialized. Now if you use the other method where you say shape array picture equals here, and you have dot 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 dot, you know, and you have, you know, well, let's not imagine, let's spell it out for you. New shape, new shape, new shape. Okay, so in this case, I created 3 actual shapes. So in here, instead of null, 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 I have a shape, a shape, and a shape. So picture 0.move would not give me the NPE. It would say, sure, fine, because there's valid values in each one of those elements. Okay, I think, let me check our vocabulary, make sure, oh, that's at the end of the chapter. Okay, I think we're done with arrays. Short video this time, good. So we'll come back in a minute with searching. Thank you.